going to talk about managing the spring flush from what we can do on the forage side of things. I'm going to start by just giving a little background context, and then talk about some growth rates and yields that are pretty typical for cool season pastures, and then look at a few strategies to optimize your system on your farm. All right, so a little background context. Everybody's probably seen this about 20 or 30 times this year, but the standard cool season grass growth curve. And what I want to illustrate is the things we can do from, really right now until the first or mid part of May to mitigate this big flush of grass that's on its way. Okay, we want to be the most efficient and get the most value out of our grass, so we don't want to waste it, and we don't want the quality to deteriorate. So this is kind of the scientific figure of it. And then I want to show you 3 pictures in layman's terms. So most people, this is kind of where we're at right now. Maybe an overgrazed pasture that probably overgrazed a lot of the year. Something that, let me back up real quick. We want to get out of this situation as quick as possible. We're ready for the green grass. But here's where we can end up in 6 to 10 weeks if we do things to exacerbate the spring flush that's coming along. And then just for kind of reference, this is kind of a picture of, in my mind, of where we want to be. So where we're at, where we can end up in a short amount of time, and then where we want to be. That's kind of the journey over the next few weeks. And I'm going to back up again. I just want to say, and I saw this come up in the questions, when is it time to turn out on the grass? And I would argue that you don't want to get in a hurry, especially if your fields tend to be overgrazed, if your stocking rates are a little higher than normal and you use supplementation, if you're kind of hard on the grass. For longevity and production over the course of years, it's best to let that grass get 4 to 6 inches tall before you start grazing it in the spring, just so it can photosynthesize and send some carbon down to the roots. Because whatever you see above ground is kind of like a mirror image for the amount of root mass that's growing below ground. So if there's further questions about that, we can talk some more about it, but I did want to touch on that because a lot of people, including myself, are tired of feeding hay. So let's talk about some growth rates, why they're important, and then some of the yield work, the yield responses we've seen in the past couple of years based on some nitrogen fertilization we've done. I want to point out, right now in this spring flush period coming on, we're trying to balance the forage growth and availability with what the livestock needs are now, plus trying to keep in mind of what our future needs might be as far as hay production and unknown growing conditions, basically ensuring against drought. It's never, you can't go wrong by having a little bit of extra grass on hand, even though it might not be the best quality, because we don't know what the summer is going to bring. But the soil temperatures really drive this breakout from winter dormancy into the spring growth. And I'm showing you this picture here. It's on the east side of my house, and I've got an outdoor wood furnace that pumps hot water into the house. And along that, where that trench was dug, you can see I'm losing a lot of heat. The soil temperatures, I ought to measure them, but the soil temperatures are higher, and that grass is greening up. It's starting to grow already. I've even got a couple dandelions blooming there where I'm losing that heat. So you can see it in the physical world, but I've also got some data here that on the top panel, it just plots the temperature, and I'm sorry it's in Celsius, but we can convert 6 degrees Celsius is about 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and then 14 is about 60. So in that range from 40 to 60 Fahrenheit is kind of when we, as a daily average temperature of the atmosphere, it's kind of when we see this spring growth start to kick in. And basically, when you get several nights in the low to mid 40s, where you're not losing as much heat from radiational cooling at night, that's when you gain a lot of ground on the soil temperatures, and the grass can start to grow. Now you can get some setbacks in cold snaps, but in general, if we get several nights of low to mid 40s, we're opening up to the spring flush coming on. Now, we can't really control the soil temperature or the ambient temperature, but we can look at how nitrogen might impact fescue growth when it interacts with temperatures. Okay, so if you look at the bottom panel, the open squares on the bottom, that's the control treatment, no nitrogen. And you follow along with the soil temperature above, increasing over this 30-day period. But we can see if we put on 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre, that it really bumps up the fescue growth. The leaf extension rate is about 5 times as higher over that 30-day period when we've put on 200 pounds per acre of nitrogen. And in fact, with no nitrogen, at almost the end of April, we see slow enough leaf extension rates. They're just about as slow as the nitrogen treatments earlier on at the end of March. Well, does that mean we need to put 200 pounds per acre of nitrogen on all of our fields, on all the acres? I would argue not, because we'll end up, it's not cost effective. We'll end up with so much grass in the spring flush. But at the same time, 50 pounds of nitrogen would probably kickstart some growth on some selected targeted areas and get you out of the hay feeding situation and into grazing a little bit sooner. So with nitrogen, we don't want to accentuate a problem, but it can be a helpful tool to use. Here's some other data about growth rates, and this kind of ties into another thought we'll approach in a few minutes. But I just want you to notice the top panel shows the growth rate. It's in kilograms per hectare. If we take that times 0.9, we get pounds per acre. So the top panel is the regrowth rate of tall fescue and orchard grass in this case, but we don't really worry about the species. But these are grasses that had been harvested 7 days before. So we can see, 25 to 35 pounds per acre per day is the amount of dry matter that's accumulating in grass that had been harvested 7 days previous. Okay, at the same time, if you look below, that's the 21-day, the grass that was harvested 20 days previous. The growth rates are 1.5 to almost 2 times as high. So we need a couple of reasons that's important. First, we need to understand that if we're continuously grazing these pastures off, they can't photosynthesize, replenish the root carbohydrates, and make enough grass to be productive on the farm. And then second, I think we can actually utilize this phenomenon really to slow grass down if we need to early on to help control the spring flush. And I've got some more data to show from Dr. Burns. This is from West Virginia, and it's kind of a messy slide, but what I wanted to point out, I'm going to go back a slide real quick. So remember, the growth rates change based on, the within a harvest schedule. And then second, the growth rates change, pretty dramatically between years. If you look at year one compared to year three, the range in these growth rates are from 15 up to 55 pounds per acre per day. That can set you up for, budgeting deficit or quite an excessive amount of production if you're not tracking it in the field. And then secondly, Dr. Burns was showing, the proper height to begin grazing. So he's got a 31 centimeter tall grass that he started in on, and he either grazed that down to 9 or 5 centimeters. That's the black box and the open box. As far as growth rates go, those are pretty strong treatments. The grass is robust. You let it grow tall enough that it can replenish itself, and then you actually harvest it down to about 2-inch stubble. At the same time, the triangles, the black triangle and the open triangle, those growth rates are quite a bit lower pretty consistently. So in that way, when I think it's best to wait for the grass to get up, 4-6 inches tall before you turn in, but then you can graze it down to 4 or 5 centimeters, which is 2 to 3 inches, and then move on. But the thing we want to do is really set up this grazing wedge to be able to monitor it and know what the production is. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in the strategies. I'm gonna check my time here real quick. I'd say I've got about 7 minutes or so. So real quick, we talked a little bit about nitrogen and how it interacts with temperature early in the season. I just wanted to kind of translate that into what we've seen in recent years in like a hay harvest situation. And the big thing is, 50 pounds of nitrogen is probably plenty in most of these situations. You don't get twice as much forage production when you apply twice as much nitrogen. So I think that's pretty important to point out. And second, we get these cold streaks or late springs that start these past couple of years, and we're only seeing about 20 pounds of forage produced per pound of nitrogen that we put on, so a 20 to 1 rate, and a lot of times we'll see closer to 30 to 1 or a little bit better than that. So generally we wouldn't advise any nitrogen in the spring. We would delay that until May and try to get some summer growth, and then also in August to promote stockpiling. Okay, so let's look at some strategies for your farms. Surprise, surprise, Ryan Locke's going to talk about the grazing wedge and measuring and monitoring and managing, using the information we collect on the farms to employ adaptive management. You can't really manage stuff if you don't measure it. That's my mantra. And I'm going to kind of pick on Valerie here. She's been a trooper for us for a lot of years, walking miles in a summer to measure grass. She's using a plate meter here. It estimates the dry matter available by compressed height. But the technology has changed. We've actually developed a system similar to a Fitbit that you'd wear on your wrist that would measure heart rate and other human health attributes. That information on a Fitbit goes to a phone app. It's uploaded to the internet, and then you can log into your Apple account, I guess, and see how healthy you are. And, we just consider the value of pasture to be very high, and we promote measuring and monitoring so that you can manage it. We wanted a system for people to be able to use it rapidly and not spend hours out in the field walking around taking plunks with a plate meter. So the sensor mounts to the front of the four-wheeler. We've got an app on the iPhone and Android systems. You can see in the middle panel on the lower deck, the red brackets under the stop sign there show that it records location and a forage height measurement 50 times per second, okay? That data gets uploaded to your secure grazing wedge account. The grazing wedge has been in operation since 2006. We redesigned it so it can accept this data from our sensor. You can still use it with a plate meter or a ruler, or however you want to evaluate the pastures. You can do it the manual way, but you can also upload data from our system. So with the grazing wedge, you can monitor these growth rates, you can monitor the forage availability in the system, and you can make decisions about grazing, about fertilization, about supplementation, things of this nature. Now, next, I just want to describe an experiment we did about 12, 15 years ago, actually, but it answered some pretty interesting questions for us. It has to do basically with what happens when we do a good job of controlling the forage quality in these systems. We take out this spring flush, we harvest that grass as silage, and then feed it back if we need to, if the grazing gets short. And at the same time, we can look at this data and see what kind of gains you would expect and forage quality from pasture that's just allowed to accumulate, okay? So we evaluated 3 systems. There was 4 acres in a system. Each system was divided into 6 paddocks. The cattle rotationally stocked through all 6 paddocks. They entered a paddock, we started these give or take April 1st. That's when we turned out. The grass was about 4 inches tall. The cattle left a pasture when the grass residual height was about 2 inches tall. On the left side is a control treatment. So the cattle grazed until the grass was 2 inches tall, then they went to the next paddock, and then they kept repeating that. So eventually they were in grass that was belly deep and pretty rank, not very high quality. On the right side, you can see a system where we harvested between 4 and 6 of the paddocks for silage every year. And it was really a mistake if we only did 4. When we look at it with hindsight, we really should have made silage in all 6 paddocks. The final treatment was the same as the first treatment, so rotationally stocked with just whatever grass was there, but we also fed the steers 2 to 5 pounds of dry distiller's grains per day based on the quality of the forage. So we were trying to get 2 pounds a day out of that system by supplementing with distillers. And you can see what happens to the crude protein in the green line, the silage treatment. You know, we get 3-4 points better crude protein after the silage is made because the grass is basically in a vegetative state from April 1st until the 1st of November. What happens with the energy in the grass? Same kind of discrepancy. Good for the silage treatment. You know, if you improve forage by 10 percentage units in IVTD, which is, you can think of it as digestibility, then you're really supplying those cattle a lot of energy that they wouldn't get in the controller or distiller's grains from the grass. How did that translate to animal performance? Well, in the summer session, when they only grazed grass, which at times was belly deep, and they were in a 3/4 acre paddock for maybe 3 weeks at a time, they gained right at 1.4 pounds per day. With that same grass management plus distillers, they gained 1.75 basically. And with no supplement, just good forage management, they gained almost 1.8 pounds per day. So you can see the value in forage management. A little bit different results in the fall. There's some things we can talk about, but you know, in general, everything was a little less as far as animal performance in the fall. But the silage was twice as better as kind of residual carryover as was the rotational grazing only with no forage management. I wanted to say, I think we would see the same response in the silage treatment if we did something like just going out with a brush hog or, you know, a shredder. Some people refer to it as different things, and just removing that forage. If you can stand to quote unquote waste it by just mowing it down and getting rid of the reproductive structures, let it stay vegetative, we'd see the same kind of response. So that's what I've got presentation wise. Just as a recap here, the spring flush, it's an annual occurrence. It provides an opportunity to capture value and really set up for easier grazing later in the year. There's some management things we can do on the plant side. First and foremost, I say utilize a grazing wedge to monitor these growth rates. That gives you the information you need to know to make decisions. We can harvest the excess forage to improve the forage quality. And like I said momentarily ago, I think you'd get the same response if you just basically sacrifice that extra forage that's not very high quality. And finally, you know, there's nothing wrong with just letting it grow up and stockpiling it for summer or fall. You know, you'll take a hit in animal performance, but the pasture would be there for you. So you can reach me at my email address there, lockt@missouri.edu. If these facilitates any further discussion, you want to talk about any of these grazing systems or using paddock track on your farm. We've got producer farms across the state. We're trying to build a network of people that work with us to monitor grass growth. If that sounds interesting to you, I'd love to talk to you.
From a plant perspective, when is the optimal time to turn livestock out? What should we look for in our pasture before turning out cattle for spring grazing?
I wouldn't get in a hurry. I'd let it get, 4 to 8 inches tall, especially if you tend to kind of be harsh on it, at other times.
All right. So the second question is, at what temperature should we expect to begin the spring flush?
Yeah, that's like low to mid 40s for several nights in a row, and then concomitant 50, 60 daytime temperature. So we're trying not to lose a bunch of radiational cooling and keep those soil temperatures below 40.